You can't make this up. In a recent move to buy more votes, you know that carbon tax and that second carbon tax, and now they're trying to make like a third carbon tax that has pretty much added to inflation and increased the cost of living across the board for all Canadians. Well, Justin Trudeau realizes that the East Coast, and this is just a habit of mine, every time I refer to the East Coast Canada, I always say who to be to buy to guy. If you know, you know. If you don't, well, now you know. The who to be to buy to guys are now exempt from the carbon tax. That's right. Justin Trudeau is trying to buy the East Coast of Canada by literally cutting the carbon tax on home heating. So if you're paying more for home heating, just know that it would be a lot cheaper if you moved to the East Coast and became a who to be to buy to guy. If you're on home heating on the East Coast with oil, then you're exempt from the carbon tax. Justin Trudeau is literally trying to buy votes, and the Conservatives are not letting that go. Why are you discriminating against the rest of Canadians? Why are you discriminating against electric heat? Why are you discriminating against propane or natural gas? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So they're desperate. Justin Trudeau's gone into full panic mode, and we're going to take a look at the Conservatives point out all of those flaws. Also, there's a little bit of controversy around the Conservatives they keep getting called by the Liberals champagne Conservatives, and you're going to find out why in this episode of Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Turns out they're not. All right, sit back, relax, smash that like button if you haven't yet already, and enjoy the questions without answers. It's actually quite entertaining if you can make it through the entire video. Here we go.
With plummeting polls in Atlantic Canada, this Prime Minister is panicked, desperate, and making it up as he goes along. Only a year ago, Liberal MPs voted against a Conservative motion to axe the carbon tax from home heating. What a difference a year makes. I know my farmers in Alberta are sure wondering what it takes for them to get some relief from this Prime Minister's carbon tax.
No doubt.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted that his carbon tax is unaffordable. So how much worse do the polls have to get for the Prime Minister to axe his carbon tax for all Canadians?
Here, here.
It's quite a bit of discrimination, eh?
Ministre de l'Environnement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we came into power in 2015, projected emissions growth in Canada, so pollution levels was going to increase to 80 million tons by 2030. We brought this down 80 million tons, more than 80 million tons, in fact, and since then, we've reduced it by another 50 million tons, Mr. Speaker. So that's more than 100 million tons of pollutions that Canada won't have to endure because of us, despite the Conservative Party of Canada. We're only getting started, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan to fight climate change and to help Canadians with affordability. We'll keep going at it.
L'honorable député de Foothills.
While the Prime Minister presses pause on his carbon tax in Atlantic Canada, the Liberals are blocking a Conservative bill that will exempt the carbon tax from on-farm fuels, making food more affordable. I guess the desperate pleas of Canadian farmers don't have the same weight as the Prime Minister's plummeting polls in Atlantic Canada. But let's be clear. Putting a pause is only a move of desperation for this Prime Minister, who will double down, as this Minister just said, on his pledge to quadruple the carbon tax. Again, the Prime Minister's admitted his carbon tax is unaffordable. When will he axe his carbon tax for all Canadians?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Yeah, man, axe the whole tax. Pause the whole carbon tax until after the election.
Three fingers pointing back at you. When it came time to decrease funding to
whoever wins decides what happens next.
Sat on his hand at the cabinet table. When it came time to increase funding to farmers, all Conservatives MPs sat on their hands. And on C-3-4, if it was so important for the leader of the official opposition, he should have sat on his hand and worked a little harder.
Yikes.
L'honorable député de Foothill.
The Liberals don't care about food costs or affordability. Canadians are struggling to put food on the table after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government. Almost 2 million Canadians accessed a food bank in March. That's up 79% from March of 2019. A third of those people using food banks are children, and almost 20% of Canadian families are food insecure. A Prime Minister who is in desperation mode is not worth the cost. Again, the Prime Minister's admitted his carbon tax is unaffordable. When will he axe that tax for all Canadians so they can afford to put food on the table?
It's discriminatory.
Mr. Speaker, we know that right now many Canadian families are struggling with increased costs. Last night I was speaking with Faye, And Faye shared with me that he came to Canada with his family 5 years ago from Syria. And he shared the impact that the Canada Child Benefit had on his family, enabled them to ensure that they could buy food and the things that their children needed. This is one story, Mr. Speaker, of the 3.5 million Canadian families that receive this benefit each and every month.
$54 million in waste, extortion, corruption, and an RCMP investigation. That's ArriveCan. And we heard shocking testimony about a group of government insiders who are running a real racket in the tech sector procurement. After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government, that's how they run things. And now there's an RCMP investigation. This Prime Minister clearly isn't worth the cost. So will he fully cooperate with the RCMP in this investigation?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we have said time and time again, that we expect all contracts to be issued following the law and regulations set out in this place. Mr. Speaker, CBSA has launched an internal audit. They've increased oversight over contract granting, mandating new procurement certification courses. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the any investigation into these allegations, and again, any misconduct will come with consequences.
L'honorable député de Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
This Prime Minister has blocked so many RCMP investigations that he's lost track of them this week. These insiders involved in this are the same ones behind the $54 million Arrive scam. And the whistleblowers that brought this waste and corruption to Canadians' attention were threatened and had their contracts cancelled by the NDP Liberal government. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, he's not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop lining the pockets of well-connected insiders and fully cooperate with the RCMP?
Instead of blocking it, it's pretty criminal what he's doing.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the Conservatives taking cheap political shots at the Prime Minister instead of sticking to the facts, which is allowing any allegations of misconduct to be properly investigated.
You guys are blocking it.
Being blocked by the Prime Minister or the government. We welcome investigation to look into these allegations of misconduct. And Mr. Speaker, we expect contracts to be issued following the law.
They're trying to investigate it. You guys are blocking it.
Mr. Speaker, new information was just revealed that the Prime Minister's office refused to release documents to the RCMP during their SNC-Lavalin investigation. At the Ethics Committee, MPs were in the room, the RCMP Commissioner was in the room, ready to testify on the RCMP's obstruction of justice investigation into the Prime Minister's SNC-Lavalin scandal.
And they keep blocking it.
The Liberal government abruptly shut down the Ethics Committee before the RCMP Commissioner could testify. After 8 years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. What is the cover-up coalition hiding?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I have to admit, after yesterday's performance, I'm surprised the Conservatives would dare go down this road in dealing with the fact that they had 26 opportunities to move a motion to bring forward the RCMP to committee, but instead they choose to use that as a political ploy to block the study of looking into a lobbyist-paid trip by 5 Conservatives, including $1,800 worth of champagne. A bill, $1,200 oyster bar bill. Mr. Speaker, talk about cover-up.
Oh, that's why they call them champagne conservatives.
Colleagues, I'm certain we all want to give our attention to the Member of Parliament who has the floor next to ask a question. The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the only person in this place that has broken ethics laws twice is the Prime Minister.
That's right. Yeah.
And the Prime Minister said when he took office that the government and its information must be open by default. But after 8 years, the Prime Minister only wants to cover up the truth. The RCMP commissioner made himself available to answer questions, but the NDP Liberal government doesn't want him to speak. We've learnt it was the Prime Minister's office who blocked the RCMP from getting key documents during the SNC-Lavalin investigation. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. What is the cover-up coalition hiding?
Good question. Good question.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to me that the Conservatives would once again talk about cover-up when it's they who are using political tactics to block the study of looking into a lobbyist-paid trip for 5 Conservative members. They yelled out, Mr. Speaker, to correct me, it was 2 lobbyist-paid trips. They think that makes it better. Mr. Speaker, I'm curious, was the Chateaubriand that they consumed, was that a steak or a 600-euro bottle of wine? Perhaps they could come to committee and answer those questions.
Conservatives are dining well. It sounds like.
Chris.
A year ago, the Liberal MP from St. John's East, in a show of great compassion to Atlantic Canadians, said he was sick and tired about hearing from people complaining about the cost of heating. Then he said he and his fellow Liberals voted against removing the carbon tax from home heating. And after 8 years, NDP Liberals now admit the carbon tax is hurting people and it's not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister admit the pain he has caused and axe the entire carbon tax?
Instead of just on the East Coast for the who to be to buy to guys, that would be nice.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that climate change is real, and Nova Scotians know that climate change is real. Over the past 2 years, we've had fires, we've had floods.
The best way to combat climate change, by the way, is by smashing that like button on this video.
Help, and they need time. And that's why I'm proud that our government has incentivized heat pumps and created incentives for medium and low-income families to ensure that they can make the transition to clean and affordable energy. Our government is committed to addressing climate change, and we will be there to help all Canadians make that change.
Good job. L'honorable député de South Shore St. Margaret's.
The announcement he referenced is from a panicking, plummeting Prime Minister. And after 8 years, even that panicking Prime Minister now admits his carbon tax is not working. Yet the NDP Liberal government continues to punish Canadians with a carbon tax on everything. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost.
No, he's not.
1,000 people last night in Nova Scotia demanded the Liberals axe the tax. When will the Prime Minister do his job and axe the entire carbon tax?
For everybody. Equality, right? That's what Trudeau stands for. Equality.
Mr. Speaker, we want to save people money and fight climate change at the same time. We know that a price on pollution reduces emissions and puts more money in the pockets of middle-class families. We also know that many families who use home heating oil in Atlantic Canada are having trouble making the switch, a switch that they want to make, Mr. Speaker, to a cleaner and cheaper source of heat, particularly in rural communities. That's why we're pausing the price on pollution on home heating oil for 3 years, doubling the rural rebate, and creating a new program to deliver cleaner, more affordable heat pumps to families in the region while we save them thousands of dollars every year.
L'honorable député de Calgary-Shepherd.
It's been 8 long, miserable years with this NDP Liberal government. A year ago, they voted to keep the carbon tax on home heating, and now they're in full panic mode. With polling numbers in free fall, their new re-election
full panic mode.
Elect them that only quadruple the carbon tax right after the next election. No relief either for the second carbon tax the Prime Minister has piled on. My constituents know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the NDP Liberal government admit that their carbon tax is punishing Albertans and axe the entire carbon tax?
That's only fair, man. It's not, they're discriminating against all Canadians, except for those on the East Coast.
We were going to double the rural top-up for Canadians who benefit from the implementation of carbon pricing. We will also, through a pilot project, make it free for Atlantic Canadians who want to switch to heat pumps, which will enable them to save $2,000 per year, Mr. Speaker. What is it the Conservatives don't like about it? I'll tell you what they don't like about it. It's making Canadians less dependent from their big oil friends. That's what they don't like about it. They want Canadians to continue paying for inefficient, polluting, and pricey system. That's not what we want to do on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Calgary-Shepherd.
It's obvious that side is in panic mode because of falling polling numbers. So they're serving us election gimmicks. This week's food bank report says that 1 in 6 Canadians are working hungry. They're working and are going to the food bank. Herman in my writing tells me he's been going to the food bank for almost 2 years. So does his brother and 2 of his friends. Another constituent told me he's okay. He's only skipping 1 meal a day and he's having cereal for the 2 other days. Herman and my constituents know this. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the NDP Liberal government treat Albertans fairly and axe the entire tax so they can put food on their dinner tables?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to take these champagne conservatives seriously as they continue
champagne conservatives, eh?
Speak to the hardships that Canadians are feeling, while every step of the way they oppose the very measures that our government has consistently put forward to help the most vulnerable. Measures like the Canada Child Benefit offering families hundreds of dollars per month to support their children, and childcare, which is saving families hundreds of dollars per month. Instead of weaponizing Canadians' hardship for political gain, perhaps they could consider supporting real measures that help Canadians, like the Affordability Act.
Dude, these guys are out to lunch.
Before I proceed to the next question, I would ask all members on all sides of the House to please keep your comments to the time that you're recognized and you have the floor so that all members can...
Chances are he's specifically talking to the Conservatives.
The honourable member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mark is a local grocery store owner in Dawson City. Mark has seen his already high shipping costs get slapped with a 94% fuel surcharge because of this Prime Minister's carbon tax. A dozen eggs is $8. A pound of butter is $9. And get this, a kilogram of cheese is $30. Yukoners know they simply can't afford this Prime Minister any longer. Will this NDP Liberal government finally stop punishing Yukoners and axe their carbon tax?
Come on, Bobby boy. There you go.
L'honorable ministre de l'Environnement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Canada Energy Regulator estimates that wind power will provide about 30% of total Canada's supply in 2050, compared to less than 6% in 2021. Now, according to a recent study by the Public Policy Forum, offshore wind could be for Atlantic Canada what, and I quote, oil was for Texas or hydropower for Quebec. This is transformational for Atlantic Canada. I think a lot of Canadians, Mr. Speaker, are wondering why is the Conservative Party opposing the development of clean, renewable energy for Atlantic Canadians and, in fact, for all Canadians, Mr. Speaker?
For the question, Minister.
L'honorable député de Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite this Prime Minister's fancy photo ops yesterday, Yukoners are facing a cold winter where they have to decide between keeping their kids warm or keeping them fed. Carbon tax is causing transportation costs to double and food prices to skyrocket. Instead of making it better for struggling Yukoners, this NDP Liberal government is making it worse. After 8 years, this Prime Minister simply isn't worth the cost. Yukoners want to know, will they end in its entirety the carbon tax? When?
That's a good question. Good job, Zimmerman.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the honourable member across the way speaking for the people of Yukon. We have a fantastic member of Parliament on this side that actually represents the Yukon. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the investments that we are making in that territory are transformational investments in our tourism industry, in making sure that we have climate resiliency. Mr. Speaker, what the Conservatives have against climate change is the fact that they don't believe in it. They ran on a policy to actually fight climate change. Now they're under new management. They don't care. We're due. We're going to fight climate change for Yukoners and all Canadians.